welcome to Intermission at Folk Night at the Registry. I'm Jan Vanderhorst, and now we get to spend a few minutes with today's performer, Matthew Byrne. Welcome back to
Thank you so
Kitchener
much.
and to Folk Night.
Thank you. Good to be back after too long.
Yes. Your brand new album is called Stealing Time. It was recorded in Sheffield, England,
Yes.
with a wonderful array of musicians and Martin Simpson as producer.
Yes.
Tell me how that whole connection was made.
Yeah, it came. The seeds of it were planted when my manager and good friend Roger Lockyer back home, Foley Entertainment. Roger's been bringing in artists to Newfoundland off and on over the past few years, and often they're artists who are favorites of his, who he wants to showcase to the Newfoundland audience who might not be familiar with them. So he brought Martin in a few years ago, and he did a show in St. John's at the George Street United Church, and I did an opening set for him. And it was a little bit of a discovery for me. He was somebody who I was a little bit familiar with, but then after that I really went down the Martin Simpson rabbit hole and became a huge fan. And not just a fan of him and his interpretations of traditional songs, and also his his writing and his guitar playing, as he is a masterful guitar player, but also just it was a window then into so many of the musicians who he plays with and who he has collaborated with on all of his recordings. And so Roger brought him in a few years later, and I opened for him again. This time it was at the LSPU Hall in St. John's, and that time I had him out to the house for in the daytime. We had him out for a meal, had a fish lunch out on the back deck. It was a really nice sunny day, and I put the question to him, just kind of putting it out there. I said, I'd love to work with you on a future project. I don't know when it'll be yet, but I'd love to work with you. And he was very receptive to the idea, and he was like, yeah, I think that would be fantastic, So I kind of filed it away and said, okay, we'll follow up on that later. So I called him up a couple months later, and I said, listen, I'd like to follow up on that conversation now, and I'd like to ask you flat out, would you produce the next record? And he said, I'd absolutely be honored. So it was a real dream come true. It got backburnered because of COVID, but finally it did happen. But even right from the get-go, when he started talking about the plan, I wanted to go over and record it in Sheffield. I wanted to kind of put myself in a new recording environment with a whole bunch of different players, different producer, obviously, and kind of throw myself to the wolves over there, and make an English-sounding record with the material I had. And he started saying, well, I'd love to get Nancy Kerr on fiddle. I'd love to get Andy Cutting on box. I'd love to get Ben Nickel. I've got this guy, Ben Nickel on upright bass. He said, I've got this guy, Louis Campbell. I'd love to get him in and do a little bit of guitar. And then, of course, I remember saying, well, I'd love to have you play on it. And he said, try and stop me, he said, So I just couldn't believe what I was hearing on the phone. So it was becoming everything I could have dreamed for. And finally it got officialized in the calendar a bit more after COVID, and it was a box ticker,
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Now there are a number of traditional songs on the album, but there are also a couple of originals. There's original song called "Dream for Me."
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about that. How did that come about?
Dream for Me came out of the COVID pandemic. My little fellow was born just before the pandemic shut everything down. He was literally born just a few weeks before. Well, he was born on the 11th of January 2020, and so it was a hard time to become a new parent. It was a very, very anxiety-ridden time for everybody, but especially people who were navigating becoming a new parent. And it was very, very tough to have lost my livelihood at that time, and just to be thrown into this, not knowing what was going to happen. And anyway, there were some projects though that happened during COVID that were kind of little glimmers of light throughout a very kind of otherwise difficult time. I got a call from Kelly Walsh, and she leads the Lady Cove Women's Choir back home. I've collaborated with them a few times. And she asked if I would write a lullaby for a concert that they were putting together. She was kind of commissioning lullabies from different places, and she wanted the Newfoundland one for this concert to come from me. And I was pretty honored by it, and I unbeknownst to her, because I don't think she knew that my little fellow was. I don't think she knew that I was a new dad. So she was getting me in lullaby mode, and so it was the right time to be asking me, and I didn't know what it was going to be, but it ended up being a song about, there was a lot of strange feelings at that time of like, you've got this new little person in this very uncertain world, and you just want to kind of make sure that you're gonna nurture them and follow them to be whatever they are. You don't know what they're going to be, and I tend to kind of, sometimes I get away from the now and I think about the future, what's going to become. And so it's a song about just kind of following that journey and unconditional love and acceptance, and it ended up being, it wasn't originally a song intended for the album. It was just intended for that project that she was putting together. But by the time it was done, it meant so much to me that I had to put it on the record, and I'm glad I did. I had the Ennis sisters sing on it, and
Right.
it just ended up sounding a little different from everything else. But I think it, when people hear where it came from, it kind of makes sense too.
Right. The instrumental is called "Home to You." It's just you on guitar
Yeah.
and Andy Cutting on accordion. It's a lovely conversation between
Yeah.
two instruments.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it, Jan. And that is so much the way Andy works, is like he follows you, and then he'll kind of open up a little door so you can follow him. And it's just like he's the kind of guy where we recorded it together instead of me tracking it and then him playing over it, or vice versa. And we said, okay, well, if we're going to do this, we need to be able to kind of communicate as we're doing it. And so, because he just came in and learned it kind of, almost, I think it was that day. He had quickly listened to it before, but he didn't really dig into learning it until we sat down that particular day. And so we said, okay, well, we sat down in the room outside the studio and just went through it a bunch of times. And then we said, okay, we're ready to give it a go. And so he said, okay, well, I was in the little booth, and I was like, make sure I can see him. So I looked out through the little window, and I could see him kind of like going from kind of head down following me to like, okay, he's ready to kind of push something, and like me fall back a bit. And it was just like, that was the kind of stuff that I couldn't wait for with these musicians, because I'd heard that kind of interplay with him playing with Martin, for example. I had heard that kind of stuff on the recordings that Andy's does and Martin does, and I was drawn to exactly what you just described, and it was so nice to be able to do it with my own work as well.
With the traditional songs that are on the album, traditional Newfoundland songs, 3 of them were collected by your mom.
Yeah.
And your dad is a performer. Tell me about their influence on your music.
Their influence has been monumental for me. I mean, my mother, on the song side of things, my mother has this incredible repertoire that I'm still not to the bottom of. I'm still hearing Mom sing songs that I've never heard her sing before. She's got such a great repertoire of traditional songs, and she did a lot of song collecting in her day. She did a lot of collecting of songs from singers all over Placentia Bay, and people who would visit Newfoundland as well, whether they were coming from away for the folk night or the folk festival. Mom was part of the Folk Arts Society for a while, and anybody who would come like that, she'd get a couple songs from. And she was doing song collecting long before. Like, she didn't know she was doing field work, what I mean? She was just doing purely out of the love of it, and so she's amassed a great collection of and in the case of the songs that she got from older singers around Placentia Bay and other parts of Newfoundland, they're somewhat lesser known traditional songs, and so I've been able to kind of put my finger on versions that other people don't have, which is kind of cool, right? So I've really dived into her repertoire on all of my recordings. Dad, on the guitar playing side, has been huge. I mean, I've gotten a lot of songs from my father, but also I attribute a lot of my guitar playing to my father. The way he was a gentle finger picker who knew how to kind of position the guitar as a kind of a supporting role for a traditional song or for a ballad or a story, and making sure that it helped the story rather than get in the way of it. He really kind of influenced my understanding of that from an early age. And so my parents are kind of they're the ones who've influenced me most of anybody else in my record collection.
Now, we've got less than 2 minutes, but another thing that you were involved with recently you're a member of the Dardanelles, and they were a part of the tribute album to Ron Hynes.
Yes. Yeah.
Tell me about Ron's influence on traditional and contemporary performers in Newfoundland and Labrador.
Ron's influence was huge, and I mean, Ron, as much as Ron was he was the man of 1,000 songs. He was a writer. He was a prolific songwriter, but Ron had a huge respect for people who simply sourced songs as well. He didn't see songwriting as the only way to do it. He really appreciated and complimented many times to me, my bringing songs to the fore, right? Which is primarily what I do, is sourcing somewhat lesser known material, and he really was supportive of that. And yeah, I mean, I don't think Newfoundland will ever really be done grieving Ron. As, like, all of us just kind of assumed he'd be around forever. And so he's a pretty big influence to several different generations, and I was so glad that I was able to work with him and call him a friend at the time. Even at the times that he was hard to call a friend, I was, I have a lot of great fond memories of late night jams with Ron.
Well, we are all out of time. Thank you so much. We could be talking for 10 more minutes.
We could.
Now it's time for the second half of the show.